He poured hot coffee over her hand while a uniformed officer held her by the collar, and he did it with the calm, practiced ease of a man who had done similar things for so long that he had stopped thinking of them as cruelty and started thinking of them as maintenance. Warren Ashford called it community standards. Officer Dale Mercer called it his job. Maya Collins called it confirmation because she had been waiting 14 months for exactly this kind of evidence, and Warren Ashford had just handed it to her. But Warren Ashford did not know that yet, and that was the whole point. On this particular Tuesday evening in early October, Sycamore Glen Court looked exactly the way it always looked. Immaculate, intentional, and quietly hostile to anything that did not fit its preferred image of itself. The lawns were trimmed to a uniform height that suggested either a neighborhood covenant or a collective obsession. American flags hung from white porch columns with the kind of stillness that made them look painted rather than real. Sprinkler heads clicked in synchronized arcs across grass, so green it almost looked artificial, catching the last slant of afternoon light and scattering it across the pavement in brief, glittering fans that vanished before they could make anything dirty. Delwood Heights was that kind of place, a neighborhood that worked very hard to look effortless, that spent a great deal of money maintaining the illusion that money had nothing to do with anything. Maya Collins pulled her 2009 Ford Escort to the curb in front of number 14 Sycamore Glen Court and sat for a moment with the engine idling, looking at the small brick house the way a person looks at something they have been carrying in their memory for a long time and are finally seeing again with their actual eyes. The house was modest by the street standard single story, a covered porch with 2 old wooden chairs, a flower bed along the front walk that had gone untended since spring. The bricks were the warm reddish-brown of old construction, solid and unpretentious, the kind of house built to last rather than to impress. Her Aunt Claudette had bought it in 1991, when Delwood Heights was a different kind of place, and a black licensed practical nurse with 30 years of careful saving had to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously by the loan officer at the bank on Elm Street. She had won that fight the way Claudette Collins won most things quietly, completely, and without ever giving her opponents the satisfaction of knowing she had been afraid. Claudette had died 3 months ago. She had left the house to Maya. Maya was 38 years old. She was wearing the pale blue scrubs of a hospital housekeeper, the kind of woman this street had already decided she must be the moment she turned on to it. Her Ford had a crack in the front left panel where someone had clipped her in a parking lot 2 winters ago. She had a torn grocery bag in the crook of her right arm, a soup can, and 2 bruised apples visible through the tear. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot. She looked tired in the deep bone-level way of someone who works nights and sleeps in pieces. She looked, in other words, exactly like what Warren Ashford had already decided she was before she had even gotten out of the car. Warren Ashford lived directly across the street at number 17 Sycamore Glen Court, in a house that was 3 times the size of Claudette's and furnished with the quiet confidence of a man who had never once in his adult life wondered whether he was in the right room. He was 64 years old, silver-haired, broad across the shoulders, in the way of a man who had once been athletic and had since converted that frame into something more useful. The physical grammar of authority, the body language of a person accustomed to being listened to. He stood now at his living room window with a cup of coffee held at shoulder height, not at his hip, the way most people held a cup while thinking, but raised almost formal, as if he were perpetually about to make a toast or tip the contents onto something that displeased him. He watched Maya park. He watched her look at the house. He watched her get out of the car with the torn bag and the tired shoulders and the worn scrubs, and something in his expression did not change, so much as it sharpened the way a man's face sharpens when he sees something he had been expecting and had already decided how to handle. Warren Ashford believed in the private marrow of himself where polite language had never been required that a neighborhood was not a place. It was an argument. And the argument was always about who belonged and who was merely passing through and needed to be reminded of the difference. He had been making that argument in one form or another for 22 years, and in those 22 years, 9 families had sold their properties below market value and moved away, and the access road he needed had come within 1 parcel of completion, and the 1 parcel that remained was the small brick house at number 14, and the woman who had owned it had refused him 3 times, and then inconveniently died with the deed still in her name. He picked up his phone. Across the street, Maya Collins unlocked the front door with a key that had been mailed to her along with the temporary deed transfer and the county receipt and a letter from the estate attorney explaining that everything was in order. She stepped inside. She set the groceries on the small table inside the door. She stood in the quiet of the entryway, the smell of old wood and faint lavender, and the particular dusty stillness of a house that had been waiting, and she pressed her hand flat against the doorframe, the way you do when you need to feel something solid. 7 minutes later, a patrol car turned slowly onto Sycamore Glen Court. Officer Dale Mercer climbed out of the cruiser the way he climbed out of everything, with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been asked to hurry up and get out of the way. He was 43, thick through the neck and jaw with a buzz cut that was about 10 days past its last maintenance, and eyes that had the particular quality of boredom that comes not from having seen too much, but from having decided too quickly about everything he saw. He carried a flashlight on his belt even in the late afternoon light, and when he reached the end of Maya's driveway, he unclipped it and switched it on and aimed it directly at her face, not downward, not to the side, but straight at her eyes, the beam catching her full in the face and holding there while he looked her over with the slow, proprietary attention of a man who had been given permission to look at people however he wanted, for long enough that he had forgotten it was a choice rather than a right. Warren Ashford crossed the street to meet him, coffee cup still at shoulder height, moving with the unhurried ease of a man arriving at something he had arranged rather than something that had surprised him. He shook Mercer's hand the way business partners shake hands, brief, firm, the grip of people who understand each other. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Warren said. "Of course, Mr. Ashford." Mercer straightened slightly. Even his posture changed around Warren subtly the way a person's does around someone they respect or owe something to. Maya looked between them and understood in the cold, clarifying way that exhausted people sometimes understand things with unusual precision that this had been arranged before her car was fully parked. "You called the police on me," she said. "I did," Warren said, not bothering to soften it. He looked her over with a quick, complete assessment that left nothing out and found nothing acceptable. "I observed an unfamiliar woman entering what appeared to be a vacant property. Given your appearance, your vehicle, and the manner in which you were moving around the premises, I had reasonable concern about the possibility of trespassing theft." Or he paused just long enough to make the next word deliberate impersonation. "Impersonation," Maya said. "Of an heir," Warren said pleasantly. "It does happen, particularly with properties that have recently transferred hands." Mercer turned the flashlight, slightly still holding it at eye level. "Let's see the paperwork," he said. Maya retrieved the documents from inside the temporary deed transfer. The county receipt, the estate attorney's letter, all of it clipped together in a manila folder, the way a woman who has learned to anticipate exactly this kind of moment keeps important things. She came back out and held them out with both hands, a gesture that was partly practical and partly the kind of offering that feels humiliating even as you make it, because you know that what you are really offering is not documentation, but proof that you deserve to exist in a particular space. And the people asking for that proof have already decided the answer. Mercer took the folder. He glanced at the first page the way people glance at things they have already decided are irrelevant, his mouth twisting with something between contempt and amusement. "These look like something you printed at a library," he said. "They are legal documents," Maya said, "filed by my aunt's estate attorney." State Attorney Warren repeated softly as if the phrase were something in a foreign language that someone had learned phonetically without understanding what it meant. That is rather a large term for someone in night maintenance. Maya kept her eyes level. "It is the truth," What happened next was quick and deliberate and entirely without hesitation, the action of a man who had done similar things many times before and had never once been required to account for them. Mercer closed his fist around the documents and twisted them not a crumple but a torque, working the papers in both hands until they formed a dense, hard-edged ball of compressed paper, and then he threw it. Not dropped, not placed. Threw it. Directly at Maya's face. The hardened edge caught her left cheekbone with a sharp cracking sound that was quiet enough that a person watching from a porch might not have heard it, but was close enough to Maya's own skull that it rang through her jaw and up into her teeth. The impact opened a shallow cut just below her cheekbone. When she touched her face, her fingertips came away with blood on them. A woman gasped from behind a porch railing 2 houses down. Nobody moved. "Hands where I can see them!" Mercer barked, and Maya froze with one hand half raised in blood and rain sliding together down her face. Warren looked at the cut, then at the neighbors, and sighed with the gentle, disappointed air of a schoolmaster watching a situation deteriorate through no fault of his own. "You should be more careful with your paperwork, Miss Collins." "He threw it at me," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't decide that," Mercer said, stepping closer so that his shadow fell over her. "People with badges decide that." He leaned in close enough for her to smell the stale coffee on his breath and said in a low, practiced voice that carried just far enough for the nearest neighbors to hear, "You clean floors. You empty trash. You take orders. Don't confuse any of that with belonging." He grabbed her by the collar of her jacket and yanked her forward close enough that she could see the particular flatness in his eyes, the expression of a man who had stopped being curious about the people he was doing this to a long time ago. Ownership. Miss Collins is not just a document. It is a demonstration. And you, he said, have not demonstrated anything. Warren stepped to Maya's other side, still holding the coffee cup at that particular height. And what happened next was the kind of thing a person might later describe as an accident, if they needed to describe it at all. The cup tilted, and a wave of hot coffee arced out of it and poured across the back of Maya's right hand, the liquid still hot enough to steam in the cold air, and the burn that followed was immediate and deep and the color of something that would not heal quickly. Maya pressed her lips together so hard they nearly went white. She did not cry out. "Oh dear," Warren said softly, looking at the cup as if mildly surprised by the laws of physics. "How clumsy of me." Mercer released her collar with a shove that sent her stumbling back against the side of her own car. "Maybe next time," he said, "you will pay attention when educated people are speaking to you." Maya caught herself. She stood in the rain with blood on her cheek and a burn rising raw and red across the back of her hand, and her dead aunt's legal documents scattered in pieces across the wet driveway. She looked at Mercer. She looked at Warren. She looked at the curtains moving in every window on Sycamore Glen Court. "You should be careful," she said quietly, "about what you choose to put on record." Mercer laughed. Warren smiled. Both of them believed in that moment and completely that nobody was listening to her. Maya stood with her back against the inside of Claudette's front door until the sound of Officer Mercer's laughter faded into the rain and the street went quiet again. Only then did she let herself breathe one long, controlled exhale that she released through her nose slowly, the way her body had learned to release things over 14 months of living inside a role that required her to be someone smaller than she was. She allowed herself 10 seconds. This was a practice she had developed early in the assignment. Not a coping mechanism exactly, more of an accounting. 10 seconds to feel the weight of what had just happened, to let the humiliation land where it needed to land, to acknowledge the throb of her cheekbone and the deep, angry heat radiating from the back of her burned hand. 10 seconds to remember Mercer's fist in the papers and Warren's face when the coffee poured and the neighbors watching from behind their safe, dry windows. 10 seconds to let all of it be as terrible as it actually was. When the 10 seconds ended, her face changed. She walked to the kitchen sink and turned on the cold water and held the back of her burned hand beneath the stream until the sharpest edge of the pain subsided to something manageable. and then she leaned close to the small mirror above the sink and cleaned the cut on her cheek with a paper towel, pressing carefully against the shallow wound until the bleeding slowed. The cut was not deep, but it had bled enough to leave a red line across her cheekbone that would darken to a bruise by morning. "Uneducated," she murmured, looking at her own face in the mirror. The word did not make her angry anymore. It made her focused. On the kitchen wall beside the pantry hung a photograph in a simple wooden frame. Claudette May Collins, in her white nursing uniform, standing outside St. Agnes Hospital with her back straight and her smile proud, and her hair pinned neatly under the kind of cap that nurses from a certain era wore, with the gravity of people who understood that what they did mattered in ways that could not always be measured. Claudette had bought this house before Delwood Heights had a gatehouse or a homeowners association with its own letterhead. She had bought it before Warren Ashford had an office in the county, or a seat on the planning board, or a foundation named after himself. She had bought it the way people buy things they have earned and intend to keep quietly, completely, without asking anyone's permission. Maya touched the bottom edge of the frame with her unburned hand. "They still hate what they cannot control, Aunt Claudette," she said, and her voice came out softer than she expected. She moved down the hallway to the closet that held cleaning supplies. A mop bucket, a vacuum, spare towels, 2 boxes labeled winter clothes, and she moved the mop bucket aside and pressed 2 fingers against a particular knot in the wooden baseboard near the floor and lifted a false panel that was cut so precisely into the baseboard that it was invisible to anyone who did not know it was there. Inside the compartment sat a hardened black laptop, a compact medical kit in a waterproof pouch, and a flat equipment case no bigger than a Bible. She carried the laptop to the kitchen table and sat down, working carefully around the burn on her right hand. Thumbprint reader on the left side. Retinal scan from the camera above the screen. Passphrase entered slowly with her left hand. The screen lit up with a pale blue glow, and across the top in clean federal typography it read, "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Secure Field Access." Maya removed the top button from her jacket, which was not a button but a precision audio recorder the size of a large coat button designed to be indistinguishable from the real thing at any normal inspection distance, and placed it on a small reader connected to the laptop's left port. The device clicked once in confirmation. Audio files began to upload. Mercer's voice came through the laptop's speaker, harsh and pleased with itself exactly as it had sounded standing over her in the driveway. "I don't waste words on uneducated black people." Then Warren's voice, smooth as cream, poured slowly over something bitter. "I suspected theft, trespassing, or possibly someone impersonating an heir." The audio continued, the hard crack of the papers hitting her face. Mercer's order about her hands, Warren's theatrical surprise about the coffee, the sound of her own breath catching. She tagged the file with steady fingers, labeling it Initial Contact. Warren Ashford initiated police response. Officer Dale Mercer. Racial intimidation. Destruction of temporary ownership documents. Physical injury, cut to left cheek. Burn injury, back of right hand. Civilian witnesses present. She opened a secure video call. Her supervisor's face filled the screen. Leon Marsh, 59 years old, gray-bearded, with the particular tiredness of a man who had spent 3 decades watching good evidence get buried by comfortable systems and had not yet made peace with it. He looked at her cheek first, then at her hand. "What happened?" he said. "Don't summarize. Tell me." She told him, all of it in order without editorializing. Leon's expression went still during the part about the coffee, not angry. Something past anger. The flat, disciplined stillness of a man who has trained himself to save anger for when it is useful rather than when it is earned. "We can pull you out tonight," Leon said when she had finished. "I can have another agent take over the financial thread from a distance." That was not a request for an exit, Maya said. That was confirmation. Leon looked at her through the screen for a long moment. "Of what exactly?" "That Warren feels protected enough to humiliate me in front of half the block, in front of a uniformed officer in broad daylight on the first day I arrive." She glanced toward the front window. Across the street, Warren Ashford was visible through two narrow curtains, standing in his living room on the phone, one hand in his pocket, calm as a man discussing dinner plans. "He is not just hiding money," Maya said. "He has built a whole culture around it. That takes years, and it takes confidence, and men that confident get careless." Leon rubbed his forehead with one hand. "What do you need?" The county transfer record pushed through quietly. "I need the deed solid before the HOA tries to challenge it." She paused. "And I need everything we have on Ashford's relationship with Mercer. Calls, donations, complaints that disappeared, favors exchanged." "You will have it by morning," Leon said. He hesitated, the kind of hesitation that precedes something he did not want to say. "Maya, the burn on your hand. I can work," she said. He exhaled. "I did not ask that." After the call ended, Maya sat alone in the kitchen while the rain continued against the windows. She opened the refrigerator, bottled water mustard, a carton of eggs she had brought in a cooler from her actual apartment 40 minutes away. Dinner was toast and one boiled egg and half of a bruised apple, and she ate it standing up because sitting down felt too much like admitting the day had ended. Just before 1 in the morning, she closed the laptop and looked again at Claudette's photograph. "They think this is a house," Maya said softly. "They don't know it is a doorway." At 7:42 in the evening, something scraped across the hardwood floor of the entryway, a sound like stiff paper pushed through a narrow slot. Maya walked to the front door and picked up what had been delivered. It was printed on official Delwood Heights Homeowners Association letterhead. The HOA crest embossed at the top in navy blue and gold, Warren Ashford's name printed neatly in the margin as president of the board. The document listed 5 violations for which the property at 14 Sycamore Glen Court was being cited, and fined a combined total of $675 unsecured grocery items left in the front driveway after approved evening hours. Temporary documents and paper debris left exposed in rainfall, creating an unsightly appearance. Vehicle condition inconsistent with community aesthetic guidelines. Disruptive contact with law enforcement resulting in resident distress, and failure to maintain community standards of conduct during a neighbor interaction. At the bottom of the notice in neat blue ink was Warren Ashford's signature. Maya stood in the entryway and read it through twice, and then laughed once, a short private sound that had nothing of humor in it and everything of recognition, because arrogance always has a particular handwriting style, always leaves its fingerprints on the very documents it uses as weapons. She photographed the notice, uploaded it to the secure case file, and added a brief note. HOA pressure escalated less than 2 hours after initial police intimidation. Ashford signed personally. Pattern evident, create disorder through intimidation, then find the target for the disorder. At 8:15, headlights swept slowly across the front window. Mercer's patrol car rolled past the house at a pace that was just below the speed a person would need to be traveling if they actually intended to go somewhere. Not a stop, just a presence, just a reminder that he was circling and would continue circling and wanted her to know it. He looked toward the house as he passed, his face briefly lit by the dashboard glow, and then he was gone around the corner and the street was quiet again. Across the street, Warren's house glowed warm and golden in all its windows. Through the front glass, Maya could see him standing beside a stone fireplace with his coffee cup at shoulder height, a woman in a pearl necklace laughing at something he had just said. It looked to anyone passing like comfort and prosperity and a Tuesday evening well lived. To Maya, from where she stood in the dark with a cut on her cheek and a burned hand wrapped in a paper towel and a $675 fine for having the wrong car on the wrong street, it looked like evidence waiting patiently for the right warrant. A knock came at the back door, not the front. The back, the kind of approach that said the person knocking had thought about who might be watching from across the street and had chosen accordingly. Maya opened it to find an older white woman standing in the narrow passage between the houses, wearing a yellow raincoat with the hood up and holding a covered plate in both hands, with the careful, slightly formal manner of someone delivering something they hoped would be received in the spirit it was offered. She was in her early 70s with the sharp, clear eyes of a person who had seen a great deal more than she had ever said out loud. "My name is Ruth Tatum," the woman said. "I worked with your aunt at St. Agnes for 11 years. I saw enough from my kitchen window." Maya looked at her for a moment, then stepped back from the door. Ruth came in and set the plate on the counter, cornbread still warm, and looked at the bandage that Maya had fashioned from gauze in the medical kit and taped across the back of her right hand, and then at the strip of tape across the cut on her cheek. Ruth's face did not express surprise. It expressed recognition, the recognition of someone who had expected to see exactly this and was ashamed that she had expected it and done nothing to prevent it. "Warren Ashford has been watching your aunt's house for years," Ruth said, her voice low and even. "He made her 3 offers over the past decade. She refused him 3 times. Each time he told people afterward that she was being stubborn, that she was confused, that she did not understand the financial realities of the market." She paused. She understood them completely. "What did he want with the house?" Maya asked. Ruth looked toward the street for a moment. "There is something beneath this neighborhood that Warren has been after for a long time. Land permits, road access, some development scheme that requires a specific corridor of parcels. Your aunt's property sits directly in the path of it, and Warren cannot complete what he wants to build without it." She looked back at Maya. "Claudette knew. She told me that if he ever got too interested again after she was gone, I should give something to whoever came to live in the house if they had spine." From the pocket of her raincoat, Ruth produced a folded church bulletin, yellowed at the creases. Inside, taped to the paper with a strip of aging adhesive, was a small brass key attached to a tag that read Unit 42, Route 9 Self-Storage. "She gave me this 6 years ago," Ruth said. "She said she had kept records and that the records were in a storage unit off Route 9, and that if she ever died with the house still in her name, someone who knew what they were doing should go look at what she had saved." Maya took the key, carefully holding it between 2 fingers of her unburned hand. "Why didn't you give it to anyone before tonight?" she asked. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Because fear," she finally said, "wears church clothes very well when you get old." She touched the corner of the plate with 1 finger. "Eat something. Women fighting rich men forget food. That is how they lose strength." After Ruth had slipped back through the wet grass between the houses, moving slowly but steadily, Maya returned to the kitchen table and opened the files Leon had sent through the secure portal. Claudette's old HOA complaints. 3 of them filed in 2015, 2017, and 2019. All dismissed by the board, all written in Claudette's careful, formal handwriting. Near the bottom of the final letter, 1 sentence stopped her cold. "Mr. Ashford has repeatedly suggested that certain residents would be happier elsewhere. I believe his definition of elsewhere depends on the color of the resident." Maya read the sentence twice. Then she looked at the brass key on the table and at Claudette's photograph on the wall and understood that this case was no longer simply about what Warren Ashford wanted from her. It was about what he had tried to take from Claudette Collins for 30 years, 1 fine and 1 suggestion and 1 pointed silence at a time. And the old nurse had known it, and she had kept records, and she had left them to someone with spine. They came at 8 the next morning, which told Maya everything she needed to know about how Warren Ashford operated early enough to catch a person off balance, late enough to be technically within reasonable visiting hours, the exact timing of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of pressure that looked from the right angle, like concern. Warren stood on the porch in a light gray suit with his coffee cup at shoulder height, flanked by Patricia Holt and George Stanton. Patricia was the HOA's compliance secretary, thin, precise perpetually, in cardigans the color of submission, carrying a clipboard that she held to her chest like a shield. George ran the Property Standards Committee and wore a golf jacket with the Delwood Heights crest stitched over his left breast pocket, which was the kind of detail that told you exactly how seriously he took the distinction between himself and people he considered beneath his notice. Maya opened the door halfway and kept 1 foot planted behind it. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning, Miss Collins," Warren said, with the smooth, warm delivery of a man who had never once been told that his warmth made people uncomfortable precisely because it was so thoroughly strategic. "We hope we are not disturbing you. We are here to conduct a preliminary exterior review of the property, which, as I am sure you understand, remains under community concern pending confirmation of your ownership status." "My ownership is confirmed with the county," Maya said. "That does not give you permission to inspect me like property." Patricia's eyebrows lifted slightly. "We are inspecting the condition of the residence, Miss Collins. Not you personally." George Stanton looked past Maya into the entryway with the proprietary attention of a man who believed his committee membership entitled him to look wherever he wanted, and his gaze moved across the old hardwood, the cardboard boxes stacked near the hallway, the mop bucket sitting beside the closet door. "You planning to run a cleaning operation out of here?" he asked. "Commercial use of a residential property is prohibited under Section 4 of the Community Covenant." "I live here," Maya said flatly. Patricia made a mark on her clipboard. Maya had watched her make it before she finished the sentence. "You wrote that before I answered," Maya said. Patricia's face tightened into an expression that was not quite an apology and not quite a denial. Warren stepped smoothly into the small silence that followed. "Miss Collins," he said, his voice dropping into something gentler and more dangerous. "Perhaps you are not yet familiar with how an established neighborhood of this kind functions. Documentation matters. Presentation matters. The conduct of a property holder matters particularly in the early period when the community is still forming its understanding of a new resident." "My aunt documented this house with 31 years of property taxes," Maya said. "Yes," Warren said, "and by all accounts, Claudette was a respectable woman." He paused a pause so brief that only someone watching for it would have noticed it, and then continued. "But respectability, Miss Collins, is not automatically inherited. That is simply the nature of things." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. He was using Claudette's good reputation as the blade acknowledging her, praising her, and in the same breath, using the praise to imply that Maya had not earned what she had been given, that the woman who cut her face yesterday had a legitimate question about whether the woman standing here today was worthy of what the nurse in the photograph had built. "Neither is decency," Maya said quietly. George shifted his weight. Patricia's pen stopped moving for a moment. Warren's smile remained in place, but lost something behind the eyes, a microscopic retreat, like a man stepping back from a fence he had been leaning on and discovering it was sturdier than he expected. He looked at the bandage on Maya's hand with an expression of mild social concern. "Accidents are unfortunate," he said. "Accusations, of course, are more serious." "You poured hot coffee on my hand?" Maya said. Patricia looked up sharply. George looked at the floor. Warren's voice dropped half a register. "I would strongly advise you, Miss Collins, to be careful repeating claims of that nature. Claims you cannot support have a way of complicating a person's situation considerably." Maya looked at him steadily and said nothing. Patricia read from the clipboard the $675 fine broken down by violation, each one based on conditions that had been created by Mercer's search of her driveway and the papers he had thrown and the groceries he had knocked to the ground. Maya was being fined, in other words, for the evidence of what they had done to her. As they turned to leave, Maya said, "Mr. Ashford?" He paused. "My aunt used to say that a house remembers who came to its door trying to shame the person inside." Warren's smile vanished for half a second, not long, but long enough, and then returned polished as always. "Your aunt is gone, Miss Collins," he said pleasantly. Maya's voice was soft. "But the house is not." She closed the door. She crossed to the kitchen table, photographed the notice, scanned the page, uploaded everything to the case file, and typed a single note. Pattern confirmed. Create disorder. Punish target for disorder. Ashford present and directing. Witnesses: Patricia Holt, George Stanton. 3 days after the inspection, a black envelope arrived through the mail slot. No stamp, no return address, hand-delivered sometime before 7 in the morning. The kind of delivery that makes a point out of the fact that someone knows your schedule. Inside was a cream card with Warren Ashford's name embossed in gold at the top, inviting all Delwood Heights property holders to the annual preservation luncheon at Hargrove Pines Country Club, and at the bottom of the card, written in blue ink, in a hand that was not Warren's, were the words "attendance encouraged for all property holders under review." Maya called Leon from the kitchen table. "He has invited me to his luncheon." "That is faster than I expected," Leon said. "He wants the room to see me in a place he has decided I do not belong," Maya said. "He wants to watch me be uncomfortable while the people who admire him watch too. And you want to let him?" "I want to hear what he says when he thinks I am too small to matter," she said. "Bold men forget microphones." Hargrove Pines Country Club sat 10 minutes outside Delwood Heights, behind a stone gate and a row of old oaks that had been trimmed so precisely over so many years that they had the look of trees disciplined into a particular shape by generations of expectation. Maya drove her Ford Escort up the long entrance and watched 2 valets exchange a glance before one of them reluctantly stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, "staff parking is around the back." She handed him the invitation without a word. He read it, swallowed, and gave a stiff nod. Inside, the dining room smelled of lemon polish and roasted chicken, and the kind of quiet, expensive perfume that suggested its wearers had never been required to eat standing up. White tablecloths, silver cutlery, round tables full of silver-haired men talking about property values and grandchildren applying to good universities, and women in pearls exchanging gentle smiles with eyes that were not gentle at all. The whole room performing a particular kind of ease that cost a great deal to maintain and required the right kind of audience to sustain it. Warren saw Maya the moment she stepped through the entrance. For 1 second. Just one. His face tightened the way a man's face tightens when something he had planned for nevertheless arrives with more certainty than he had quite accounted for. Then he smiled, and the smile was so smooth and immediate that only someone watching for the tightening would have noticed what preceded it. "Miss Collins," he said loudly enough for the tables nearest the entrance to hear. "How kind of you to join us. Delwood Heights believes very much in inclusion. Even when there are unresolved questions about my house," Maya asked pleasantly. "About your readiness to join a community with history." Warren corrected his tone, remaining warm, the correction delivered as if he were doing her a kindness by being precise. Warren's assistant had placed Maya's card at the farthest table from the podium near the kitchen doors, the table closest to where the staff moved in and out, the position that said everything about how Warren had thought through the logistics of having her present. From that position, however, Maya had a clear view of the entire room and an unobstructed sightline to the side hallway where men occasionally stepped away from their tables to speak more freely. Warren spoke for 20 minutes about preserving Delwood Heights' character, about protecting elderly homeowners from fraud, about keeping the neighborhood safe from outside elements, seeking to exploit legal loopholes about the responsibility of established residents to maintain what previous generations had carefully built. He never said Maya's name. He did not need to. The entire speech was organized around the shape of her absence from the room's understanding of itself. The way a speech about maintaining the quality of a river does not need to name the particular contamination it is trying to prevent. Toward the end of the meal, Dale Mercer came through a side door in plain clothes, sport coat over a golf shirt, the flashlight conspicuously absent from his belt for the first time since Maya had seen him, and shook Warren's hand with the easy familiarity of men who see each other in rooms that do not appear in official records. Warren leaned close and said something. Mercer glanced at Maya's table. "Looks like the lesson did not stick," Mercer said. Warren's response was quiet enough that only the recorder button on Maya's collar could confirm what she already suspected. Some people require repetition. A woman named Dolores in her 60s, silver hair tucked under a black service cap, moving through the room with the unhurried competence of someone who had spent decades being invisible to the people she served. paused beside Maya's table with a coffee pot and bent slightly and said without looking at her, "Don't react." "They like that." She poured coffee Maya had not ordered. "Name is Dolores. I have worked here long enough to know when a man wants a woman humiliated in a nice room." After the luncheon, Warren approached her table. "Did you find the presentation useful, Miss Collins?" He sat without being invited, which was the kind of thing men like Warren did so naturally they had stopped noticing it. "I found it clear," Maya said. "Good." He folded his hands on the tablecloth. "Then you understand that your aunt's property sits at a complicated position relative to some plans that would benefit the entire community, plans that have been years in development. There is a fair market offer available to you, relocation assistance, a clean transfer, and the opportunity to step away from a situation that will only become more difficult if it continues." "My aunt refused you," Maya said. Something moved through Warren's expression, not quite contempt, more like a man correcting a historical error. "Your aunt was old and suspicious and sentimental," he said. "She lacked vision. I am asking you not to repeat what became ultimately a rather costly mistake on her part." Maya stood slowly. "Thank you for lunch, Mr. Ashford." In the parking lot, Dolores appeared beside Maya's car, breathing hard, and pressed a folded napkin into Maya's hand. Inside the napkin was a handwritten number and 3 words. "Thursday, back hall." "I clean the private dining room on Thursdays," Dolores said. "Men leave things, notes, copies of things they should not be copying. Old women with coffee pots become invisible to them after a while." She glanced back toward the club entrance. "Your aunt drove my sister to chemotherapy 6 times when Warren's charity said the transportation funds were exhausted. I have not forgotten that." Maya folded the napkin and put it in her coat pocket. "Neither have I," she said. The morning after the luncheon, Maya found 3 envelopes taped to her front door before her coffee finished brewing, one from the HOA, one from the Property Standards Committee, and one with no return address that contained a single printed line, "Go back where you belong." She photographed all 3, placed each in a clear evidence sleeve, and entered them into the case file timeline before she had finished her first cup of coffee, because that was the kind of morning it was. The street was performing its usual innocence when she stepped outside. Sprinklers ticking a garage door humming open at the end of the block, the sound of someone's radio through a screen door. Mrs. Voss had stationed herself near her rose beds across the street, in the posture of a woman doing gardening, though the roses were already soaked from the sprinklers and needed nothing. Mr. Pearson was making his way toward his mailbox with his newspaper under his arm at a pace that happened to require him to pass within 15 feet of Maya's car. 2 women in tennis skirts coming from the direction of the community courts had paused on the sidewalk with the focused casualness of people who had stopped walking for reasons unrelated to watching. Maya stood on her porch with the 3 envelopes in her hand and let them watch. Mrs. Voss called across the street. "Miss Collins, perhaps it would be best if things were kept a little quieter for a while." Her voice had the careful, slightly elevated quality of someone delivering a private opinion disguised as neighborly advice. "Quiet for whose comfort?" Mrs. Voss Maya asked. The woman flushed. "There is simply no need to make everything so unpleasant. Officer Mercer cut my face with my own legal papers," Maya said clearly at a volume that reached the sidewalk. "Mr. Ashford poured hot coffee over my hand while Mercer had me by the collar. I would like someone on this street to explain to me at what point I became the unpleasant one." Mr. Pearson cleared his throat. "Now, none of us actually saw it that way." "You saw enough of it to know it was wrong," Maya said. He looked down at his newspaper. Calvin Briggs came up the driveway at that point, 72 years old, wearing a faded Navy veteran's cap and a canvas jacket, his face carrying the particular kind of lines that come from decades of choosing very carefully when to speak and when to stay quiet and living with both choices equally. He was carrying a white paper bag from the diner on Route 9, and he walked up to Maya's porch and handed it to her directly without preamble. "My wife was at St. Agnes for 6 weeks. In 2018, he said. Your aunt sat with her twice when visiting hours were technically over and I was stuck at a VA appointment. She pretended not to notice the hours. He looked at the bandage on Maya's cheek. Claudette Collins was a good woman. This street was better when she was on it. Mrs. Voss from across the street. Calvin, are you sure that is? Carolyn Calvin said with the quiet patience of a man who had decided at some point in his 70s to stop apologizing for the things he knew to be true. At my age, wisdom is mostly knowing when you have been cowardly too long. The street went silent. Calvin lowered his voice. Warren has been on the phone since last night. Private meeting Thursday before the HOA session. He is telling people you are unstable, that you threatened him at the luncheon. Did you believe it? Maya asked. Calvin looked at her steadily. No, but I did not say that loud enough. He nodded at the bag. Biscuits and sausage gravy? My wife used to say a woman under siege ought to eat like a farmer. Ruth arrived at noon with a casserole and news that Patricia Holt had told the book club that Maya had faked the burn on her hand, that she had done something to herself before arriving, that the whole thing was fabricated for legal leverage. Maya looked at her hand beneath the gauze and said nothing for a moment. Ruth set the casserole down. Macaroni and cheese, extra sharp cheddar. Don't argue. She looked at the case file spread across the kitchen table. You found Claudette's letters, all three, Maya said. She filed complaints in 2015, 2017, and 2019. All dismissed. She wrote more than letters, Ruth said. She reached into her purse and produced a folded church program, yellowed at the edges, and pushed it across the table. She gave me this 6 years ago and told me what it was. I never opened the locker. I kept telling myself there was no right moment. She looked at Maya's bandaged hand. I think I was wrong about that. That evening, from her darkened kitchen, Maya watched Warren's private meeting through the narrow gap in the curtain, cars arriving one by one, Patricia's white Lexus, George Stanton's pickup, Mrs. Voss's sedan, and Mercer's personal truck, parked 2 houses down, as if the distance made him invisible. Her camera caught every arrival. She documented every name. Leon called at 9:40. Dolores had come through. The private dining room copies contained a preliminary development agreement. Ashford Development Group. Claudette's parcel listed as essential, the project completely unviable without it. How much money is in this development? Maya asked. Enough, Leon said, to make a very polite man very dangerous. And then, after the call ended from across the street, Warren's study light blazed on and through her camera. Maya could see him at his desk, no longer standing with his coffee cup at shoulder height, no longer the composed, gracious host of the luncheon. He was leaning over the desk, with both palms flat on the surface, his weight forward, his posture, the posture of a man who needs a physical object to keep him upright. He picked up his phone and set it down. Picked it up again. His movements had lost their characteristic smoothness. For the first time since Maya had arrived on Sycamore Glen Court, Warren Ashford did not look like a man in control of the room he was in. He looked like a man counting the exits. It was a small thing, barely visible through the window at that distance, barely more than a shift in how a man held himself when he thought no one was watching. But Maya had been watching men who thought no one was watching for 14 months, and she knew what it meant. She typed a single addition to the case file. First visible crack in subject's composure, 9:58 p.m. He is beginning to calculate. Maya drove to Route 9 self-storage before the neighborhood woke up, leaving Sycamore Glen Court at 5:50 in the morning when the sprinklers were just beginning their first cycle, and the only person she passed was a man in a bathrobe, retrieving his recycling bin from the curb. Unit 42 was in the third row of the facility, its orange door identical to every other door in the row, except for the tarnish on the handle and the small numbered plaque that matched the tag on the brass key. The key turned stiffly after 31 years without regular use, but it turned and the door rolled up with the metallic groan of something long undisturbed. Inside, 3 wooden chairs stacked with dust on their seats, 2 Christmas wreaths in plastic storage bags, a steamer trunk with a broken latch, a box of nursing textbooks with the spines facing inward, and in the far corner against the back wall, a metal file cabinet with a rusted handle and 3 drawers. The first drawer held old tax records. Property, federal, state, 3 decades of careful documentation organized by year and held together with rubber bands that had gone brittle. The second held letters from the Delwood Heights HOA going back to 2003 each one, with Claudette's handwritten responses clipped behind it, every exchange carefully preserved in the order it had occurred. The third drawer was locked with a small padlock that Maya opened in under 30 seconds with the pick set from her kit. Inside was a binder 3 inches thick, labeled in Claudette's handwriting on the spine, Delwood Heights Access Road, Ashford Development Group. Maya's pulse changed the way a runner's pulse changes when they crest a hill and see the finish line not slower, but different. She opened the binder. Land surveys showing the proposed corridor for the access road with Claudette's property circled in red pen. Purchase offers from Ashford Development Group, each one escalating in dollar amount over the years, each one with Claudette's handwritten notation across the top. Refused. See letter file. Photographs of men, including George Stanton, and a man Maya recognized from HOA documents as a former board member entering Warren's private office building on 3 separate occasions. Each photograph dated and labeled in Claudette's small, precise hand. And at the back, a printout of an email from George Stanton to Warren Ashford, dated 4 years ago. If Collins refuses the current offer, the recommended approach is pressure through code enforcement compliance. First, then hardship, lien proceedings. She is 71 and on fixed income. She will not have the resources to sustain a prolonged legal defense. Behind the email was a handwritten note from Claudette. A single page, written in the same careful hand as the complaint letters. If this house becomes a burden to whoever comes after me, remember this. They don't want the property because of what it is. They want it because of where it sits. It blocks the road. And as long as the house is in our family's name, they cannot build what they intend to build. Don't let them turn my home into their road. Maya stood still in the storage unit for a moment, her burned hand resting on the file cabinet, the binder in her other arm, and said quietly to the dusty air and whatever remained of her aunt in it, I found it. I have got it. Outside, a car rolled slowly past the end of the row tires on gravel at the particular speed of something that did not need to be that slow unless it was looking for something. Maya went still and lowered the binder to her side and listened, and then heard the car stop. A door opened. Footsteps. The heavy, deliberate footsteps of a man who walked the same way he did everything with the weight of authority he had been issued by someone else and had since claimed entirely as his own. Dale Mercer stepped around the corner with his flashlight in his hand, aimed at eye level, the beam finding Maya immediately in the shadow of the open unit. He was in jeans and a tan jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, and he smiled the way people smile when they have caught someone doing something they planned to catch them doing. Funny place for a cleaning lady to spend her morning, he said. Maya said nothing. The backup recorder in her jacket pocket was already running. Mercer came into the unit uninvited, filling the doorway with his frame. When people start digging through a dead relative's belongings, he said conversationally, they find all kinds of things they don't understand. Old papers, big words, legal phrases, the kind of thing that can get someone in a lot of trouble if they don't know what they are actually looking at. He grabbed the binder. Maya reached for it with her burned hand. Pain shot up her forearm like a current sharp enough to make her breath catch, and she pulled back before she could stop herself, and Mercer noticed and smiled the smile of a man who has just learned something useful about where a person hurts. Still tender, he said. He held the binder for a moment, looking at it, then shoved it back into Maya's arms. Listen to me, he said, stepping close enough that she could smell the wintergreen tobacco he chewed between cigarettes. You have exactly one clean option here. Sell the house at the number Warren offered. Take what he is giving you, which is more than you came in with, and go back to wherever you were before your aunt decided to make you her personal cause. Because the next time you decide to push into something that does not belong to you, it will not be coffee on your hand." "Was that a threat?" Maya asked. "That was me using small words, so there is no confusion," Mercer said. A horn sounded at the far end of the row, 2 short blasts unhurried. Mercer looked over his shoulder. A black SUV with federal plates sat at the end of the row, the engine idling, the windows dark. 2 silhouettes visible inside. He dropped the binder at Maya's feet. "Smart girl," he said, the smile not quite reaching anything behind it anymore. "You brought friends?" "No," Maya said, picking the binder up with her unburned hand. "You brought witnesses." For the first time since the driveway on the first day, something in Mercer's expression shifted. Not fear, not yet, but the first genuine awareness that the room he was standing in was not as empty as he had assumed it was when he walked in. He backed out of the unit, got in the pickup, and drove away fast. Leon's agent, a woman in a plain gray coat, stepped out of the SUV. "Monroe said you would be irritated," she said. "Tell Monroe I found the road," Maya said. "And the pressure plan, and Stanton's name on the hardship lien strategy." She held up the binder. Enough for a stronger door knock. Back at the house, a new HOA notice was taped to the door, immediate hearing scheduled. Thursday, 7 p.m., Delwood Heights, Community Hall. Subject ownership. Conduct resident safety and property compliance. Maya removed it, went inside, placed the binder on the table beside the other evidence, and called Leon. "He followed me," she said. "Tried to take the binder." "I have every word," Leon exhaled. "Thursday's hearing is going to be a trap." Maya looked at Claudette's last note still in her hand. "I know," she said. "Let them put it on the record." Maya dressed in Claudette's bedroom on Thursday evening with the careful attention of a person who understands that how you enter a room tells that room something about how you intend to leave it. She chose a plain white blouse and a dark coat and low practical heels, and she stood in front of the mirror above Claudette's dresser and looked at herself for a long moment, the healing cut on her cheek, the clean white bandage wrapped over her right hand, the recorder button already in place on her collar lapel. 3 things lay on the bed behind her: Warren's hearing notice, the Claudette binder, and the backup recorder. Leon called while she was buttoning the coat. "You don't have to go in without support," he said. Maya looked at Claudette's photograph on the dresser. The proud shoulders, the white uniform, the eyes that had looked at this neighborhood steadily for 31 years. "If federal agents walk in beside me, Warren closes up," she said. "He performs for cameras and gives nothing. I need him comfortable. Comfortable men use their real voices." She paused. "Bold men forget microphones. Don't bait him beyond what the recorder can use," Leon said. "I won't start anything," Maya said. "I will just make sure he finishes it." The Delwood Heights Community Hall was a low brick building set back from the main road behind a parking lot full of vehicles that told the story of the neighborhood's self-image late-model sedans, a Mercedes SUV, 2 pickup trucks that had never carried anything but groceries. Inside, the folding chairs had been arranged in precise rows facing a long table at the front of the room, and 40 or so residents had turned out in the good clothes people wear to things they have decided are important, which told Maya that Warren had framed Thursday's meeting as something worth dressing for. The room smelled of burnt coffee and the almond-scented butter cookies that sat on a tray near the back wall, and the American flag beside the podium had been positioned at an angle that made it look both official and accusatory. Warren sat at the front table in the center position, Patricia Holt to his left with her clipboard, George Stanton to his right, 2 other board members flanking them, and Dale Mercer stood at the side wall in full uniform, arms folded across his chest, with the practiced look of a man who wanted to appear to be security, rather than what he actually was, which was the muscle of an operation dressed up as community standards. When Maya walked in, Warren saw her immediately and smiled with the warmth of a man greeting someone whose presence confirms everything he expected. "Miss Collins." he said loudly enough for the front 2 rows to turn and look. "We were beginning to wonder if you would attend." "You sent the notice, Mr. Ashford," Maya said, and walked to the empty chair in the front row and sat down without looking at Mercer. Mercer from the side wall loud enough for the row nearest him. Maybe she needed someone to read it to her. A few people chuckled. Maya sat without looking at him. Calvin Briggs sat in the 3rd row with his navy cap in his lap. Ruth Tatum was near the back with her purse held in both hands, watching the front of the room with the expression of someone who has decided to stay awake through something difficult. Warren called the hearing to order with a single tap of the gavel and opened his folder. The list of community concerns regarding the property at 14 Sycamore Glen Court was read aloud by Patricia in the precise, slightly theatrical voice of a woman reading a legal document she has rehearsed disruptive police presence. Exterior vehicle condition, suspicious nighttime movement, confrontational behavior during a property standards review, and failure to demonstrate alignment with the values and standards of the Delwood Heights residential community. Not one item on the list mentioned what Mercer had done to Maya's face with her own papers. Not one item mentioned the coffee. Not one item acknowledged that the disruptive police presence had been initiated by a phone call Warren himself had made. The list had been constructed to make the consequences of the assault sound like the cause of a problem, and Warren had done it with such smooth deliberateness that Maya suspected he had done exactly this kind of thing before, many times to many people who had fewer resources than she did, and who had therefore simply paid the fines and moved out. Warren referenced Claudette in the opening remarks carefully, with the practiced, condescending reverence of a man who praises the dead because the dead cannot object. By all accounts, he said the previous owner of the property was a respectable woman whose community contributions were valued. He paused in exactly the right place. But respectability, as I am sure most of us understand, is not automatically inherited. These things must be demonstrated. Warren nodded to Patricia, who looked at Maya with the slightly pursed expression of a woman exercising authority she knows is borrowed. "Miss Collins, you may speak briefly." Maya stood not to the podium but to the open space in the center aisle so that she was facing the residents rather than the board, which was not what Warren had arranged, but which he could not object to without making the arrangement obvious. My Aunt Claudette Collins lived at 14 Sycamore Glen Court for 31 years. She said, her voice carrying easily through the room's imperfect acoustics. She paid her property taxes every year for 31 years. She worked as a licensed practical nurse at St. Agnes Hospital for 27 years. She helped some of the people in this room during the hardest weeks of their lives. She sat with spouses who were dying. She drove people to appointments when they could not drive themselves. She brought food to doors on streets that were nothing like this one because the people behind those doors needed someone to come. She paused. And the day I walked into her home with a key and a county receipt and a transfer deed, Mr. Ashford called the police and suggested I might be stealing it. Warren, that is a distortion of Officer Mercer, destroyed my temporary deed papers and threw them hard enough to cut my cheekbone. Maya continued as if she had not heard him. Mr. Ashford splashed mud from the driveway into that cut. Later, while Officer Mercer had me by the collar, Mr. Ashford poured hot coffee across the back of my hand. She lifted the bandaged hand so the room could see it. I am not asking this board to take my word for that. Mercer stepped forward from the side wall. You expect these people to believe you over a uniformed officer of the law. He let his eyes move across the room before landing back on her. And there was something in the look, the particular contempt of a man who has operated this way for so long that he genuinely cannot imagine being held accountable for it, that Maya had been waiting for since the first day. You got proof, college girl, he said loudly for the room. The insult missed what it was aimed at. Maya let it land where the room could hear it. I thought I was uneducated, she said. Two people in the second row shifted in their chairs. Mercer's jaw tightened. Maya turned to face Warren directly. Mr. Ashford, Why did you offer to buy my aunt's property 3 times in the past decade? The room went very still in the particular way rooms go still when a question lands that everyone present realizes should have been asked years ago. Warren closed his folder with the deliberate care of a man buying himself half a second to recalibrate. Private real estate inquiries, he said, are not germane to this proceeding. They are, Maya said, if code enforcement HOA fines and police intimidation are the tools being used to manufacture a forced sale. She looked at George Stanton, who was sitting to Warren's right, with the expression of a man who had been told the fence was solid and was now watching someone walk through it. "Mr. Stanton," she said, "did you write to Mr. Ashford? That if my aunt refused the development offer, the recommended approach was pressure through code enforcement, first followed by hardship lien proceedings." George's face went through several things in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, and then a pale, stubborn blankness that was its own kind of answer. "This is outrageous," Warren said. "Is it false?" Maya asked. Nobody answered. In the second row, a woman said quietly to the man beside her, "My brother got one of those buyout offers." From the row behind her, so did the family that lived next to us before they moved. They said the fines just kept coming. Warren brought the gavel down twice sharp. "Order. This is a board proceeding, not a public accusation session." Calvin Briggs rose from the third row slowly with the unhurried dignity of a man who has made a decision and intends to stand in it. "Let the woman speak," he said. "Warren, Mr. Briggs, please." Mercer stepped toward Calvin. "Sit down, old man." The room inhaled. Calvin looked at Mercer with the patient, unembarrassed calm of a man who had been in rooms considerably more frightening than this one and had come home from all of them. "Officer," he said, "I have been called worse by better men." Ruth Tatum stood in the back row. "Let her speak." Ruth said, her voice steady and clearly directed at everyone in the room, not just the board. Mrs. Voss from 2 chairs away. "Ruth, please don't." Ruth turned to look at her. "Carolyn." I watched from my kitchen window while that man put his hands on her. I watched, and I stayed inside. Don't start advising courage now. The room went completely silent, the kind of silence that falls when something true is said plainly, in a space where plainness has been avoided for a very long time. Mercer stepped toward the aisle. "That is enough," he said. "This woman is trying to destabilize a lawful community process because she does not know how these things work." Maya looked at him evenly. "I know exactly how they work," she said. "You scare them. He finds them. The board buries them. And then someone makes an offer to take the burden off their hands." She looked at the room, the people who had watched from their porches, who had watched from their windows, who had chuckled when Mercer made the comment about reading. "And the neighborhood watches." Warren stood. His voice dropped into the register he used when he wanted to remind people who held power in the room. "Miss Collins, you are new here. You are emotional. You are plainly out of your depth. Do not mistake a few sympathetic glances for protection. This community has rules. And records," Maya said. She picked up her coat from the chair. "Schedule another hearing, Mr. Ashford. Find me whatever number your committee decides. But my aunt's house is not for sale." Mercer stepped into her path near the door. "You will regret that," he said quietly. Calvin turned from the third row. "Was that an official police statement?" Officer Mercer glared at him. Too many eyes. Too many ears. He stepped aside. Maya walked out of the community hall without looking back. Warren called after her. "You cannot win a fight you do not understand." Maya stopped at the exit and looked back over her shoulder. "No," she said quietly. "You cannot buy a witness you already underestimated." Outside, Leon's message appeared on her phone. 3 words. He took the bait. Through the glass doors of the community hall, Maya could see the residents rising from their chairs, no longer in neat rows. no longer arranged the way Warren had arranged them. For the first time since Maya had arrived on Sycamore Glen Court, the people of Delwood Heights were standing in ways that Warren had not planned. The street was wrong the next morning in a way Maya felt before she could name it. The sprinklers were running on their usual schedule. The flags were moving in the usual light wind, but there was a quality to the stillness that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with held breath. No neighbors at mailboxes, no women in tennis skirts. Mrs. Voss's curtains were still in a way curtains are only still when someone behind them is actively keeping them that way. The white envelope was taped to her door at the level of a person's eye. Inside was a single printed line. Last chance. Sell the house before you lose more than papers. She photographed it, placed it in an evidence sleeve, and was still entering the notation into her timeline when someone knocked on the door with the urgency of a person who did not expect to be kept waiting. Mercer stood on the porch in full uniform, 2 officers flanking him. Across the street, Warren Ashford waited on the sidewalk beside Patricia Holt and George Stanton, all 3 of them watching with the particular stillness of people who have arrived to observe something they have already arranged. Warren held his coffee cup at shoulder height. Maya Collins. Mercer said, "Step outside. Am I being detained?" "You are being questioned in connection with an extortion complaint." His voice had the practiced evenness of a man reading from a script he had rehearsed. "Mr. Ashford has reported that you threatened to release private documents in his possession unless he agreed to compensate you for vacating the property." Maya looked past Mercer at Warren across the street. He stood with his face arranged into the expression of a man reluctantly doing what the situation required. "I want a lawyer," Maya said. Mercer's mouth curved slightly. "You can say it from the station." One of the officers beside Mercer shifted his weight and looked at the sidewalk. Mercer turned to him with a brief flat look that settled the matter. "Cuff her," he said. Maya stepped forward and put her hands out in front of her, and the moment the cold metal of the cuff closed against the gauze over her burn, the pain that came was sharp enough to pull her breath in through her teeth in a single audible hiss. Mercer heard it. He looked at her hand and tightened the left cuff, one deliberate notch past where it needed to be. Calvin Briggs came off his porch across the street. Officer Mercer. He called, his voice carrying clearly in the morning quiet. "What are the charges, Mr. Briggs? Go back inside." I asked a legal question. Mercer pointed at him. "And I gave you a legal answer. Inside." Warren called across the street in his smooth, sorrowful voice. "Calvin, please. This is painful enough for everyone without making it a spectacle." Mercer walked Maya to her Ford Escort and opened the passenger door without asking, and reached under the seat with practiced confidence. The movement of a man who has done this before, who knows where things will be, because he put them there, and came out with a thick envelope, wrapped with a rubber band cash visible through the unsealed flap. He held it up at shoulder height the way Warren held his coffee cup, and the effect was the same. "Look at that," Mercer said. A woman behind a screen door gasped. Warren closed his eyes with the brief, performative sorrow of a man deeply disappointed to be right. Calvin from the edge of his driveway. "Did anyone see Officer Mercer search that vehicle before this morning?" Mercer pointed at him again. "One more word. Mr. Briggs and I will write you up for interference with a police investigation." Ruth Tatum appeared at the side of her house in her housecoat, moving with the purposeful walk of a woman who has decided that her age entitles her to go where she pleases. "Daniel Mercer," she said, using his full name with the particular weight that older women give, the full names of men they have known since they were young enough to be corrected. "You ought to be ashamed." Mercer turned on her. "Ma'am, this does not concern you." Ruth looked at him with the flat clarity of someone who has nothing left to lose by seeing things plainly. "I was old before you were mean," she said. "That is enough to make it concern me." Nobody laughed. Nobody looked at their phones. The neighbors who were watching, and there were more of them than the previous day, watched in the particular silence of people being offered a choice about what they will remember. At the station, Mercer put Maya in a small interview room and sat across from her with a paper file and 2 cups of coffee, one of which he set in front of her in a gesture that might have looked like courtesy in a different room. He laid out the terms: admit the extortion attempt, agree to vacate the property during the ownership review, sign a statement, and maybe the whole thing stayed local. "You are nervous," Maya said. Mercer's laugh came a half-second too fast. "I am bored." "No," Maya said. "At the storage unit, you assumed I was alone. At the HOA meeting, you assumed Warren had the room. Today, you needed planted cash. That means the truth is further along than you expected when you started." Something shifted in Mercer's face, not much, but enough. He leaned forward with his fists on the table. "You are a cleaning woman," he said, his voice dropping into the low, deliberate register he had used in the driveway on the first day with a dead aunt's house and a mouth you did not earn. "You people get one piece of paper and start thinking you belong in rooms that better families built." Maya looked at him steadily. "Is this the statement you want on record?" He looked at the camera on the wall. "Records in this town," he said, "get handled by people who know how to read them." A detective opened the door, pale, holding his phone as if it had done something to him. "Mercer. Hallway. Now." Mercer left. The transmitter, sewn into the hem of Maya's sleeve, vibrated once against her wrist. Leon had the live feed. 30 seconds later, when Mercer returned, his face had the particular quality of a man who has received news he did not anticipate and is working very hard not to show it. "Who are you talking to?" he said. "My lawyer," I hope Maya said. The door opened again. The detective stood in the doorway with 2 other officers beside him. "Uncover," the detective said. Mercer stared at him. "You are making a nowdale." The cuffs came off. Maya flexed her burned hand and held the pain quietly. The detective did not look at her. "Miss Collins," he said, "you are free to go pending further review." He set it to the wall. Outside, Calvin was waiting in Ruth's old Buick with Ruth in the passenger seat and a thermos in her lap. "Figured you might need a ride," Calvin said. As they turned onto Sycamore, Glenn Court Warren was standing in his driveway watching the car arrive. He did not smile. That silence told Maya more than any statement could have, because men like Warren Ashford always smiled when they were winning. And the absence of the smile meant the frame-up had failed, and men like Warren did not forgive that kind of failure in themselves. Leon called at 9:40 that night, and the first thing he said was, "You need to hear this directly from me." Maya sat at Claudette's kitchen table with the thermos Ruth had sent home with her, the cold making the burn on her hand pulse in slow, deliberate waves that she had learned over several days to breathe around rather than fight. "Tell me," she said. Warren had influence inside the courthouse, not the quiet, peripheral influence of a man who had donated to a judicial campaign, something more structural, more embedded, more carefully constructed over years of relationship building and targeted generosity. Leon had identified 3 potential jurors with connections to Ashford shell companies or Ashford-adjacent businesses. One who had donated to Warren's Delwood Heights Preservation Fund. One whose son was employed by a company that had received 3 municipal contracts through George Stanton's committee. One who had received a consulting payment through a real estate LLC connected to Warren's development group. The local prosecutor assigned to the extortion complaint had attended Warren's country club fundraiser in the spring. "So the courtroom is already arranged," Maya said. "That is what it looks like," Leon said. "If this goes to trial under local jurisdiction with the current jury pool, the evidence we have becomes theater. It does not matter how clean the recordings are or how clear the documents are if the verdict is already decided." Maya looked at the burn on her hand and thought about how precisely the trap had been set, not just the frame-up with the planted cash, but the whole architecture of it built over years, piece by piece, the HOA and the code enforcement, and the police patrols and the private meetings and the country club luncheons. All of it designed to make the target feel that every institution in reach was already occupied by people who had been told what to do with her. "What do we need?" she asked. Something that ties Warren personally to the frame-up, the development scheme, and the jury influence, Leon said. Right now we have pressure pattern and dirty hands. We need command. We need proof that he directed all of it, not just benefited from it. Men like Warren never touch the dirtiest paper, Maya said. No, they smile while other people leave fingerprints. Leon's voice changed slightly. There may be something. We believe Ashford keeps a private data server at his main residence off-grid backup, not cloud-based. If he senses federal exposure, he can wipe the whole thing remotely. He paused. The wipe takes 8 seconds, according to a vendor invoice buried in a subpoena return. Maya looked toward the dark shape of Warren's house across the street, the upstairs study window still lit. Where is it? Basement level behind the wine room. Biometric lock retinal scan, live fingerprint pulse reader, independent power supply, and a counter-intrusion current wired into the access panel. Leon paused again in the specific way that meant he was deciding how to say something he knew she would not want to hear, stopped from outside. It is not just an electric deterrent, Maya. It is enough current to cause serious physical damage. Possibly worse. Maya's burned hand throbbed as if it understood the implication before she did. Do not think what I know you are thinking, Leon said. If he walks into that courtroom with the jury bot, Maya said the whole neighborhood watches him win. The families he pushed out do not get their cases reopened. The people who filed complaints and got dismissed do not get a record. And everything Claudette kept in that storage unit and everything we have collected for 14 months sits in a file that nobody with the authority to act on it is going to touch. I will not trade you for a server, Leon said, and his voice had the flat absolute quality of someone who has made a decision rather than a preference. It is not your trade to make, Maya said. Across the street, Warren's study light went out. 10 minutes later, the side door of the house opened and George Stanton slipped out carrying a flat black case with a small silver logo on the side. Maya read it through the zoom on her camera, North Star Private Data Systems. She sent the clip to Leon with a single note. We may already be too late. Calvin texted at 10:15. He had overheard George outside the community hall after Thursday's meeting telling Patricia that Warren had said the jury would not be a problem if it came to that. Calvin had written it down word for word. Maya sent his account to Leon jury influence, verbally confirmed by civilian witness. Leon's response came back in minutes diner. 6 a.m. No movement before then. Maya read the message and set the phone on the table. She looked at Claudette's last note still on the table beside the binder. Don't let them turn my home into their road. She looked at the dark window across the street where Warren had stood an hour ago, pacing with his phone. She did not answer Leon's message. She went to bed at midnight and lay awake for most of it. And the thing she kept coming back to was not the risk, but the arithmetic. What was lost? If she weighed against what was lost, if she did not. They met at the Route 9 diner at 5:42 in the morning when the breakfast crowd was just beginning. Retired men with newspapers at the counter. A table of construction workers eating fast before a job site. The waitress moving through it all with the particular efficiency of someone who had been doing exactly this for a very long time and had made peace with the repetition. Leon arrived in a dark overcoat and slid into the booth across from Maya and placed a folder on the table between them without preamble. Inside were exterior photographs of Warren's house taken by the federal surveillance team and a partial vendor map showing the North Star Systems configuration. He pushed it aside and set 3 other things on the table: a sealed evidence pouch, a small encrypted drive, and a blank declaration form. You write it by hand, he said. No shortcuts, no typing. Maya looked at the form. So they know it was mine. So they know you were not running. She picked up the pen with her left hand and wrote slowly, the words coming out with more weight than she expected, each one landing on the page with the particular gravity of something said, because it had to be said and not because saying it was easy. My name is Special Agent Maya Collins. If this package is opened without my presence, it means I believed evidence in the Ashford investigation was at immediate risk of destruction. I am not fleeing prosecution. I am not abandoning assignment. I am acting to preserve federal evidence connected to Warren Ashford officer Dale Mercer and possible corruption within local court proceedings. She paused, the pen resting against the page without moving. Leon waited. Outside, a truck pulled into the parking lot and the headlights swept briefly across the window and passed. Maya wrote one more line. If I do not return, do not let them call it fear. Leon looked at the sentence for a moment. Then he began sealing the box, the evidence pouch, the encrypted drive, the declaration, the spare FBI credential. Claudette's storage documents, Calvin's written statement, Ruth's storage key, Dolores's club contact number, and a clean evidence index. Packing it with the methodical care of someone who was doing something they had been hoping not to have to do. Feels final, Maya said, watching him press the tape across the cardboard. It is supposed to feel serious, Leon said. Not final. She almost smiled. You always split words when you are worried. I am always worried when one of my best agents starts sounding like a memorial plaque. They drove separately to a post office 2 towns over. The clerk was an older man with reading glasses and a coffee stain on his tie. The kind of man who had spent 30 years mailing other people's important things and had developed a quiet professional respect for the weight of sealed packages. Insurance on this? He asked. Maya rested her bandaged right hand on the counter. As much as you allow. He looked at the bandage with the gentle, incurious courtesy of a man who had learned over many years not to ask people questions they had not volunteered answers to. Something valuable. More than I can explain, she said. Certified. Restricted delivery. Signature required. Addressed to Leon Marsh, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Outside, Leon was waiting beside his car. He caught her wrist gently as she passed, careful of the bandage, careful of the burn beneath it. Maya, he said. She stopped. You are not the evidence, he said. No, she said. But tonight, I may be the only way it survives. She got into her car. Leon stood in the parking lot and watched her go and did not tell her to be careful, because telling Maya Collins to be careful was the kind of thing a person said when they needed to feel they had said something, and Leon Marsh was not that kind of person. By noon, Warren had rewritten the story through channels Maya had anticipated but not timed precisely. A reporter outside the courthouse delivered a statement that Warren had apparently called in that morning, describing Maya Collins as a woman who had arrived in Delwood Heights under false pretenses, had escalated every neighborly interaction into a confrontation, and had now apparently fled the jurisdiction rather than face the charges pending against her. By 2 o'clock, Mercer had added his contribution from the steps of the police station, a small, regretful shake of his head for the cameras, the practiced disappointment of a man performing honesty. People who make false accusations often find it easier to run than to answer for them. That is all I will say. A reporter. Do you believe she fled, Officer Mercer? Mercer cowards usually do. Warren gave his statement from the steps of the community hall at 3, with the American flag visible over his right shoulder at an angle that suggested the composition had been considered. It is unfortunate, though perhaps not surprising. Miss Collins appeared overwhelmed by the legal and community responsibilities that come with property ownership from the beginning. Delwood Heights welcomes all lawful residents, but we cannot allow confusion and hostility and unfounded accusations to place this neighborhood in jeopardy. Ruth watched the statement on her kitchen television and turned it off in the middle of a sentence. Liar, she said to the empty room. Calvin sat in his garage with the door half open, staring at the folded Navy flag he kept on the workbench, and typed Maya's name into his phone twice and deleted it both times, and finally sent the only thing that felt honest. Still here if needed. No answer came. That was the hardest part. Maya was not far away. She was in the back of a rented van parked 2 blocks from Warren's private residence, dressed in black utility clothes, watching a silent video feed from a small exterior camera placed earlier by a 2-person federal surveillance team. The feed showed the front of the house, the driveway, the basement-level windows, where a thin line of blue-white light was visible between the stone foundation and the ground, even when the rest of the house was dark. Leon sat beside her, arms crossed, watching the same feed. "We don't have authorization for entry," he said. "I know. If you cross that line, I cannot guarantee what happens to the case afterward." "I know that, too." Warren's Mercedes left the driveway at 6:18 in the evening, moving at the unhurried pace of a man with dinner plans he has had for weeks and sees no reason to rush toward. The house staff had left through the service entrance 20 minutes earlier. Leon handed Maya a slim transmitter device. "The moment you start the transfer, DOJ intake will see it before I do. That is the chain." He looked at her. "No improvising." She looked at him. That was useless to say, he said. She tucked the transmitter into her jacket. "If I get the transfer started, you will see it." She moved toward the van door. Leon caught her wrist gently, carefully avoiding the bandage. She looked back at him. "You are not the evidence," he said. "I know," she said, "but tonight I might be the only door." She stepped out into the dark and moved through the service path behind the garage along the garden wall, past the trash enclosure to the side entrance Ruth had described from one of Claudette's old notes. A door in the stone foundation that the original house plans called a service access, and that Warren's renovation had turned into a utility corridor. It was unlocked in the way that things are unlocked when the person who owns them is confident that no one would dare. Inside the house smelled of cigar smoke and leather furniture and the particular sharpness of lemon oil wood polish that older formal houses accumulate over decades of careful maintenance. She moved without touching what she did not need to touch down the rear stairs, past the laundry room, past the wine room with its polished glass doors and backlit shelves of bottles arranged by region, and behind the last shelf where the light did not reach unless you were looking for it. A steel panel set flush into the stone wall with the small silver logo of North Star Private Data Systems embossed in the lower corner. Her transmitter vibrated once. Leon had signal. The panel lit when she approached fingerprint reader retinal scanner, a small green indicator light showing the live pulse reader active. Beyond the panel, barely audible through the stone, the hum of server hardware, the particular frequency of machines processing and storing a sound like bees working behind a wall. Maya sat in the van for 45 seconds before opening the door. Not because she was deciding. She had already decided. She sat because she wanted to remember what her hands felt like when they still worked normally. Before she asked them to do something she could not undo. Then she stepped out. And now she stood here in Warren Ashford's basement in the dark with her burned right hand pressed against the biometric reader and everything she had come to do still ahead of her. She peeled the gauze back from her right hand. The skin beneath was still red and tight and barely healed, and when the cool air of the basement touched it, the pain came immediately, not sharp yet, just present, the way old injuries announce themselves when they sense what is coming. She pressed her palm flat against the reader glass. The system woke. A red indicator light began to flash, and a calm voice from the panel speaker said, "Emergency deletion protocol armed. 8 seconds to purge." She pressed harder. The wound pulled open under the pressure of her palm against the glass, and then the heat came, and then the current, a white-edged shock that ran from her palm up through her forearm and into her shoulder in a single punishing wave. The retinal scanner lowered from the wall. She forced her face toward it, her eye watering in the light. The system scanned and rejected. 6 seconds. She shifted her weight, keeping the burning hand on the panel, and looked into the scanner again with the focused stillness of someone who has trained to be still under worse pressures than this. A click. Retinal pattern accepted. 4 seconds. A second warning appeared on the panel screen. Unknown biometric source. Emergency transfer route detected. The steel door behind the wine shelf opened with a heavy metallic thud that vibrated through the floor. Server towers stacked behind glass panels glowing blue-white in the dark room. She stumbled forward and shoved the encrypted drive into the maintenance port with her left hand. The system sparked. Her right hand was still on the panel. 2 seconds. The current surged again, stronger this time, decisively stronger, and her knees buckled and she hit the server rack with her shoulder and would have gone to the floor if the rack had not held her up. She hit the final command with her left hand. The screen changed. Transfer initiated. Department of Justice secure intake. Connection established. She let herself breathe, just once. Then the panel exploded in sparks, and the shock threw her sideways into the rack, and she fell to one knee, cradling her right hand against her chest, the skin blistering now across the back of it in a way that she did not look at, because looking would have made it difficult to stay focused on the screen. But the data was moving. In the van outside, Leon watched the transfer begin on his monitor, and the tech agent beside him said quietly, "She got it." Files streamed across the server screen in rapid succession. Ashford Development Group, Jury Consultant Payments, Mercer Private Transfers, Stanton Hardship Lien Coordination, Local Prosecutor Communications, Offshore Accounts, Police Reports Altered, Access Road Acquisition Timeline, Property Acquisition Strategy dating back 12 years, the names of 11 families, the dollar amounts they had accepted under pressure. Then from upstairs, footsteps. A door. George Stanton's voice, sharp and confused. "What is that alarm?" Maya killed the light on her shoulder strap and backed behind the nearest server rack, pressing herself into the narrow space between the rack and the stone wall, breathing through her nose in the slow, controlled way that keeps a person's silhouette from moving. In her earpiece, Leon's voice came through clipped and urgent. 2 men from the garage. "You need to exit now." The transfer bar on the server screen visible to her from the gap between the racks read 62%. "I cannot unplug," she said, barely above a whisper. "If I unplug now, we lose Warren's command files, the direct communications, the jury contacts, everything that ties him personally to the frame-up, rather than just the development scheme." She grabbed a maintenance tablet from the equipment desk along the wall with her left hand and shoved it into the track of the vault's interior door. Not enough to stop anyone from opening it, but enough to slow them down by a few seconds, which was all she was asking for. George Stanton's voice was closer now on the other side of the wine room. "The door is jammed." A second voice, harder, less surprised, more professional, forced it. The door to the vault shuddered against the tablet, then shuddered again, harder. The tablet cracked, and then the door gave way, and George Stanton came through in a wave of white chemical fog from the fire suppression system Maya had triggered, pulling the emergency lever beside the server rack with her left hand and releasing a burst of suppressant that filled the vault and the wine room beyond it in a blinding white cloud. The alarm began to scream. "Transfer bar 89%. George entered through the haze, coughing, eyes red, scanning the room with the panicked urgency of a man who is afraid of what he might find, and more afraid of what it will mean if he does not find it fast enough. He saw Maya through the clearing edges of the fog and stopped. "You," he said. Maya stood with her left hand raised, not in surrender, but to keep his attention on her, rather than on the screen behind her, where the transfer bar continued its patient work. George lunged for the server rack. Maya stepped into his path and he grabbed her injured wrist. The right one, the burned one, and the pain that came was so immediate and complete that the edges of her vision went dark for a moment, and the sound that escaped her was something she had not planned for, something involuntary and raw, and she hated the sound even as she heard it. George flinched, just slightly. Just enough, the reflexive, unpracticed flinch of a man who has spent his career in boardrooms rather than in rooms where people hurt each other, who has ordered harm at a comfortable distance but does not have the constitution to look at it directly when it is happening in front of him. Maya drove her shoulder into his chest with the momentum of her entire body weight shifting forward. He went back into the server rack and fell hard, and the second man, a private security contractor, reached for her from the doorway. The chemical fog and the slick floor slowed him by 2 steps, which was 2 steps more than she needed. Transfer bar 97%. 99. Transfer complete. The server monitor went black. Every drive in the vault began its self-wipe simultaneously. George stared at the blank screen from the floor with the expression of a man watching something he cannot undo. "No," he said. "No. No." Maya pulled the encrypted drive from the maintenance port and held it in her left hand. "From upstairs, federal agents. Hands where we can see them. Hands visible now. George stopped moving. The contractor dropped to his knees. Leon appeared in the doorway of the vault with his weapon drawn, and when he saw Maya's right hand hanging at her side, the gauze on it dark now with something that had come through from underneath his face, changed in the way a person's face changes when they see the cost of something and have to reckon with whether it was worth it. DOJ got it, Maya said. All of it, Leon said. All of it, Leon. Only then did her legs do what they had been waiting to do. Leon crossed the vault in 4 steps and caught her before she reached the floor, and she let herself close her eyes. Not because she was finished, not because it was over, but because the evidence was no longer inside the walls that Warren Ashford had spent years making, certain no one would ever penetrate, and that was the only thing she had needed to know. "Transfer complete," she said very quietly to no one in particular, and to Claudette's photograph still in her memory hanging on the kitchen wall 40 minutes away. All of it. By sunrise, Warren Ashford had arranged the narrative with the same meticulous care he brought to everything else. Maya Collins, in Warren's version, was not a federal agent. She was a desperate woman who had broken into his private home, damaged irreplaceable property, assaulted a contractor in his own basement, and fled responsibility the moment the situation exceeded her ability to manage it, which was consistent, he said, with her behavior throughout her brief and contentious time in Delwood Heights. The local news had the story by 8. By 9, the framing had reached the morning shows. By 10, Delwood Heights believed it, or at least believed it in the way that comfortable communities believe things that allow them to continue being comfortable, which is a specific and very durable kind of belief. At 10 o'clock, the courthouse filled for a hearing on whether Maya Collins had violated her release conditions in the extortion case. Warren's attorneys had filed for immediate detention. The local prosecutor was moving fast with the urgency of a man who wants something finished before someone with more authority arrives to complicate it. Warren sat in the front row of the courtroom in a charcoal suit, his expression arranged into the particular combination of sorrow and civic duty that he wore on the occasions when he needed people to believe he was doing something painful that his values required. Mercer stood near the courtroom aisle in full uniform with his thumbs hooked in his belt and his flashlight on his hip and the look of a man who had been looking forward to this morning for several days. Patricia Holt sat behind Warren with Mrs. Voss and George Stanton's attorney. George himself was not present. His attorney had not yet explained why. Calvin and Ruth sat together in the back row, close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching, both pale, both quiet, both watching the front of the room with the expression of people who have made a decision to stay and witness something, even though witnessing it will cost them something. The judge entered. The room rose. The local prosecutor stood. "The state is prepared to demonstrate, Your Honor, that Miss Collins failed to appear unlawfully entered Mr. Ashford's private residence and tampered with protected computer systems. We request immediate revocation of release." Warren lowered his eyes with the timing of a man who has practiced looking sorrowful. Mercer turned to the officer beside him. "Told you she would run." Ruth heard it from the back row. That woman did not run. She said not loud enough for the judge to hear, but loud enough for the people around her. Mercer glanced back. "Ma'am, please don't embarrass yourself." The rear doors of the courtroom opened. The room went quiet in the absolute total way that rooms go quiet when the thing that everyone has been told to expect is replaced by something no one expected. A silence so complete that the sound of the door's hydraulic mechanism closing was the loudest thing in the room. Maya Collins walked in. She wore a plain black suit. The cut on her cheek had healed to a thin, pale line that would have been invisible at 10 feet if you did not know it was there, but at 5 feet it was undeniable. A small, quiet fact about what had happened on the driveway of 14 Sycamore Glen Court on the day she arrived. Both hands were wrapped in clean white gauze from the knuckles to just below the wrist, and the bandaging on her right hand was reinforced with a second layer of dressing that was visible as slightly stiffer and slightly thicker than the left. And near the center of the palm, a faint stain had come through from underneath, not bright, not dramatic, just present, just real. She walked slowly and without apology, each step controlled in the way of someone whose body is managing something significant and is choosing not to perform the management. Leon Marsh entered behind her, followed by 2 federal agents in plain clothes. Mercer's smile disappeared with the particular completeness of a light being switched off, not dimming, not fading, simply gone. Warren in the front row went still in the way of a man whose mind has raced several steps ahead of the moment and has found nothing good waiting there. The judge looked up from her papers. "Miss Collins, this court was informed that you had failed to appear. I am here, Your Honor." The prosecutor stood immediately. "Your Honor, I must object to the presence of federal personnel in these proceedings unless they are here as..." Leon stepped forward. "Special Agent Leon Marsh, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are present because this matter now involves an active federal corruption investigation, and we have evidence directly relevant to the charges currently before this court." The room stirred the particular stirring of people who have come expecting one kind of proceedings and have just realized they are in a different kind entirely. Warren stood, which was something he did when he wanted to use his height and his presence and the accumulated authority of 20 years of community leadership. "Your Honor," he said with the smooth, wounded confidence of a man who has never once had to raise his voice to be believed, "this is an obvious attempt to derail legitimate proceedings against a woman who broke into my home." "Your server vault, Mr. Ashford," Maya said. She did not raise her voice. She did not step toward him. "Not your home." His eyes flickered a small thing barely visible, but the judge was watching him, and the flicker was the kind that judges notice, the kind that comes when a careful man hears something that requires a recalculation. And in that flicker, for just a fraction of a second, Warren Ashford saw himself back in his basement study, standing over the map of the access road, telling George with complete confidence that the system was impenetrable, that no one could extract what was on those drives without triggering the wipe, that the whole point of building something that secure was that you never had to worry about it. He had believed that, absolutely. He had staked everything on it. And now the woman he had dismissed as a cleaning lady was standing in a federal courtroom with both hands bandaged and the evidence already delivered. The coffee cup, for the first time since Maya had arrived on Sycamore Glen Court, was not in his hand. There was nothing for him to hold at shoulder height, nothing to pour. Mercer stepped forward, moving into the aisle with the authority of a man in uniform who is accustomed to movement settling arguments. "Your Honor," he said, turning to give the room the benefit of his expression. "This woman has been manipulating every room she has entered since the day she arrived in Delwood Heights. She is unstable. She has made false accusations against 2 respected members of this community, and she has now apparently decided that breaking federal laws is an appropriate response to the consequences of her own behavior." He turned back toward Maya with the complete contemptuous certainty of a man who has been using this particular tone on people for 12 years and has never been asked to answer for it. "She is," he said, uneducated. The word left his mouth and landed in the room, and the room received it, and for 1 second everything was still. Then Maya turned to face him, and the stillness became something else entirely. Behind Dale Mercer's eyes, in the space between 1 second and the next, the storage unit on Route 9 played back without permission, the metal corridor, the open file cabinet, the way he had leaned over the binder and smiled and said old papers, big words, legal phrases, dangerous for somebody without the education. He had said it directly into her face from a distance of approximately 14 inches, and he had enjoyed the saying of it, had felt the particular pleasure of a man who uses the full weight of his authority on someone he is confident cannot push back, and he could still hear himself saying, it could still hear the enjoyment in his own voice and the sound of it in his memory. In this moment, in this room, was considerably worse than anything that was happening around him. A cold sweat broke at the back of his neck. Not the hot, active sweat of anger or physical exertion, but the other kind. The kind that comes when the ground beneath a man reveals itself to have been less solid than he had believed to have been. Perhaps not solid at all. and he has been standing on it with complete confidence for years. Maya took one slow step toward the center aisle. "You keep using that word," she said. Mercer's expression shifted through several things. "What word?" "Uneducated," she said, and the word in her mouth was nothing like the word in his. It was patient and it was precise, and it was the word of someone who has been keeping it carefully in the particular place where you keep things that will matter later. The room went quiet in a different way than it had gone quiet when the doors opened. This was the quiet of people who are listening rather than the quiet of people who are surprised. "You said it the day you cut my face with my own deed papers," she said. "You said it when you grabbed me by the collar? You said it when Mr. Ashford poured hot coffee over my hand while you were holding me." She paused. "You said it because you believed that a woman who looked like me and arrived in a car like mine and wore scrubs from a hospital night shift could not possibly understand the machine you and Mr. Ashford built together. You said it because you were confident I would never be in a position to answer it." "Mercer, that is a—" Leon raised a small device. "It is recorded," he said. The judge's expression changed. Not toward sympathy, but toward something more dangerous, more permanent, the expression of a person with authority who has just understood the shape of what she is looking at. Maya lifted her bandaged hands, both of them at the same time, slowly enough for the room to register what it was seeing. Pain moved across her face, clear, controlled, and then released, and she held the position long enough for the courtroom to understand that this was not theater, but evidence that the hands in front of them were the physical record of what had been done to her and what she had done in response to it, and that both of those things were equally part of the story that was about to be told. She addressed the judge. "Before this proceeding continues under local jurisdiction, this court should know that the federal government has received evidence that Mr. Warren Ashford influenced potential jurors in this case through a network of financial relationships with jury pool members. That he directed Officer Mercer to intimidate me using his position as a uniformed officer of the law. That he coordinated the false extortion charge and the planting of the cash envelope found in my vehicle. And that for a period of not less than 12 years, he used the Delwood Heights Homeowners Association as a financial instrument to force minority homeowners from their properties through a pattern of selective enforcement, escalating fines, and coordinated police pressure, all in order to clear a land corridor for a private access road development currently valued at $11 million. Warren's laugh came too fast and too loud, the laugh of a man performing confidence rather than feeling it. "Your Honor, this is a performance." "Whatever this woman claims to have found." "No," Maya said quietly, and something in the word stopped him. Not the volume, but the particular quality of it. The quality of a statement rather than an argument. Fantasy was believing your walls were smarter than the Department of Justice. Warren's face lost color in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. Leon nodded to the tech agent near the courtroom's audio-visual equipment. The monitor at the front of the room came to life. The first clip had no sound at first. Warren's private study visible from the server vault camera, the image slightly blue-toned from the security feed. Then the audio began, and Warren Ashford's voice filled the courtroom in a way that he had never intended it to fill any room with witnesses. "If Collins refuses, we bury her in compliance. Fines first, then police contact, then hardship pressure. She will either sell or she will wish she had." Ruth Tatum in the back row let out a small broken breath that was barely audible and entirely honest. Calvin Briggs lowered his head for a moment and raised it again. Patricia Holt set her pen down on the courtroom railing beside her and did not pick it up again. The second clip, the storage unit on Route 9. The audio from Maya's backup recorder inside, and Dale Mercer's voice exactly as it had sounded on that morning with exactly the same self-satisfied ease he had used throughout. "You got one chance. Sell the house. Go back to whatever cheap apartment you came from, because next time it will not be coffee on your hand." Mercer stared at the speaker in the monitor. He could hear himself enjoying it. That was the part he had not anticipated, that hearing his own voice would make the enjoyment audible in a way it had not been when he was saying it. Mrs. Voss, 2 rows behind Patricia, looked at the floor and kept looking at it. The local prosecutor who had attended Warren's Country Club fundraiser in the spring was studying his legal pad with the fixed concentration of a man trying to be somewhere else entirely. The third clip, a spreadsheet rendered large enough for the jury box to read clearly. Names, addresses, dates of purchase, sale prices, redevelopment, profit margins. 11 families, 12 years. And in the first column, highlighted in red, the name Claudette May Collins, with a notation in the adjacent cell, hold out. Pressure unresolved. Maya looked at her aunt's name on the screen. It was the first time in the entire proceeding that her composure showed something beneath it. Not breaking, but bending slightly, the way very strong things bend rather than break. And the bending was visible for exactly 2 seconds before she straightened again and the composure returned. But those 2 seconds were enough for everyone in the room who was paying attention to understand that the woman standing in front of them had carried the weight of this name for a very long time. The fourth clip, a scan of Claudette's final HOA complaint letter, the text enlarged on the monitor. Claudette's careful handwriting rendered in the high contrast of the scan and the line near the bottom of the page. The line that had stopped Maya in the storage unit and that she now let speak for itself in this room. Mr. Ashford has repeatedly suggested that certain residents would be happier elsewhere. I believe his definition of elsewhere depends on the color of the resident. Warren rose from the front row. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice had the particular quality of a man fighting to maintain a tone that the evidence has rendered inappropriate. "I have served this community for 30 years. I have funded hospitals and veterans programs and church restoration funds. I have protected elderly homeowners from exploitation and fraud, whatever this woman claims to have found in my private." "You used charity as wallpaper," Maya said. Not loud, not angry, with the patient, precise flatness of a woman stating a fact she has waited 14 months to state in a room that has the authority to hear it. "You put veterans on your fundraising brochures and then pressured veterans to sell their homes for less than they were worth. You smiled at every luncheon and attended every board meeting and called the police on a woman carrying groceries into her dead aunt's house. And you did all of it because you had decided a long time ago that this neighborhood belonged to you and that the families already in it who did not match your definition of belonging could be removed through enough pressure applied patiently enough." Warren took a step toward the aisle. 2 federal agents moved simultaneously, not fast, not dramatically, simply present in his path immovable. The judge turned. "Agent Monroe, does the Department of Justice currently have custody of the files transferred from Mr. Ashford's private server? Leon verified, Your Honor. Full intake completed at 2:14 this morning." Warren whispered very quietly. "No." The room heard it. Maya heard it. She looked at him with the steady, careful gaze of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular moment and is choosing to let it be what it is rather than what she had imagined. "This court will recess for federal review," the judge said. "No further local proceedings will continue until I have received direct briefing from the Department of Justice on the scope and status of the federal investigation." She looked at Leon, then at Mercer. "Agent Monroe," she said, "I believe you have something further to address." Leon turned. "Officer Dale Mercer," he said, and his voice had the measured, unhurried quality of a man who has been rehearsing the exact weight of each word for a long time. "Please place your hands where we can see them." Dale Mercer looked at the federal agent in front of him, the way a person looks at a sentence in a foreign language, registering the shape of it. Aware it has meaning, unable to reach the meaning immediately. "Place your hands where we can see them." He had said those words to people on porches and in parking lots and beside their own cars in the rain at 1,000 different moments in 12 years of operating in a world where the words came from him and not toward him, where they were the beginning of a story he controlled rather than a conclusion he had not seen coming. "I am a police officer," he said. Maya was standing near the center aisle. both hands wrapped in white bandages, and she looked at him with the quiet, patient attention of someone who has been waiting for a long time for exactly this sentence. So were the men, she said, who taught you how to hide behind it. Mercer turned on her. You set me up. No, Maya said. You kept speaking. Leon stepped to the center of the room. Officer Mercer, you are being temporarily detained pending federal review of evidence involving witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, falsification of police reports, planting of evidence, and conspiracy to violate civil rights under the federal statute. You have the right to remain silent. This is... Mercer looked at Warren. Warren, tell them. Tell them what you told me, that this was handled that. Warren adjusted his cufflink with a hand that was not entirely steady. I think he said in a voice that had lost approximately half of its characteristic smoothness that it would be best at this point if everyone waited for their counsel. Mercer stared at him. Counsel. You told me the jury was covered. You told me the prosecutor would not push back. You told me all we had to do was make her look unstable long enough for the Property Review Board to act. The prosecutor's chair scraped the floor. The judge leaned forward. Officer Mercer, I would advise you strongly to stop speaking. Mercer pointed at Warren, his voice climbing past the register he had trained himself to use for authority, and entering the register of something he had kept carefully out of public view for 12 years. He said the jury was covered. Mercer said again to the room to anyone who would receive it. He said all of it was handled. He said she would fold. Warren said nothing. His lawyer appeared at his elbow from somewhere in the back of the room and placed a hand on his arm and began speaking quietly into his ear. Maya said nothing either. She had said what she needed to say, and what Mercer was doing now was saying the rest of it for her in his own voice in the record of this room, and that was exactly what Claudette's key had been meant to make possible. She reached inside her coat. Mercer's hand moved toward his sidearm. Instinct, old reflex, and 2 federal agents stepped between them before the motion completed itself smoothly without drama. The way people step between things when they have thought about the moment in advance and prepared for it. With stiff bandaged fingers, Maya removed her credentials from the inner pocket of her coat and held them out. The gold shield, the identification card. The weight of them in her hand, something she had not let herself think about during 14 months of a different kind of work. Special Agent Maya Collins, she said. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence that followed was the kind that has a shape to it. Not empty, not waiting to be filled, but complete the way a sentence is complete when the last word has done exactly what it was supposed to do. Not Ruth, not Calvin, not Patricia Holt, not the prosecutor, not Mercer, not Warren Ashford. The whole room receiving the same fact at the same moment, and the fact having a different weight for each person in it, and every person knowing that this morning and what had been said in it, and what had been played on the monitor, and what had been delivered from an off-grid server vault at 2:14 in the morning was going to be the weight they carried out of this building. The judge. How long has this investigation been active, Agent Collins? 14 months, Your Honor. Calvin Briggs rose from the back row. He did not applaud. He simply stood straight-backed, his navy cap held in both hands over his heart. Ruth stood beside him. Around them, gradually and without coordination, other people rose, not in celebration, not in triumph, but in the particular acknowledgement of people who have just understood what they had been watching without seeing it clearly, and who are choosing finally to be witnesses rather than bystanders. Warren Ashford searched the room as he was escorted toward the aisle searching for the Delwood heights he had run for 22 years. The room that smiled when he smiled. The people who deferred when he spoke the social architecture he had so carefully maintained. It was gone. Every person who had smiled was now looking at their shoes or at the floor or at Maya Collins, and the room that remained was one he did not recognize because it was full of people who had stopped being his audience. As the agents led Mercer past Maya toward the processing area, he turned his head toward her. You think you won? he said. Maya looked at the cuffs on his wrists, then at the badge on his chest for the last minutes it would be there. I think she said that you finally met the record. Mercer had no answer for that. The doors closed behind him, and the flashlight on his hip swung once against the doorframe as he passed through. It fell to the floor of the courthouse corridor with a short, cold sound and lay still. No one picked it up. Outside, as the agents led Mercer down the courthouse steps toward the federal transport, the steps that faced the street, the agents guided him past the open doors of the main hall. Through those doors, visible from the sidewalk, a group of Delwood Heights residents stood on the courthouse steps. Mrs. Voss saw him first. She did not look away. Neither did Ruth. Neither did Calvin. Mercer kept his eyes on the ground. He had spent 12 years making people look at him. Now, for the first time, he could not bear to look back. 6 months later, Warren Ashford pleaded guilty to money laundering, obstruction of justice, jury tampering, bribery, conspiracy, and civil rights violations connected to the forced displacement of minority homeowners in Delwood Heights over a 12-year period. The sentence was 19 years in federal prison. Warren Ashford was 64 years old. He would be 83 if he walked out. His house on Sycamore Glen Court was seized and liquidated as part of the asset forfeiture proceedings. The proceeds, combined with the recovery of funds from 3 offshore accounts, generated a restitution pool of $2.1 million, which was distributed to 11 families whose properties had been acquired below market value through the pressure campaign documented in Warren's own server records. Claudette May Collins's name appeared on the restitution list not for a payment because Claudette was gone, but as a documented victim of the pressure campaign acknowledged in the federal record in the formal, permanent way that Claudette's 3 HOA complaints had never been. Dale Mercer, in exchange for full cooperation, received a sentence of 8 years. His police pension was forfeited in its entirety. His badge was surrendered on the steps of the Delwood Heights police station at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning in front of 3 news cameras. In the backyard of 14 Sycamore Glen Court, in the narrow strip of ground where Claudette May Collins had once grown tomatoes in coffee cans and tended a flower bed that had gone untended since the spring. A small garden was planted, paid for by a community collection that had taken, according to Calvin Briggs, approximately 45 minutes to fill once the word went around. A simple painted sign was placed near the garden gate, letters plain and black on white Claudette May Collins Memorial Garden. Mrs. Voss crossed Sycamore Glen Court on a cold November afternoon to stand at the foot of Maya's porch steps on the last day Maya was in the house. "I'm sorry," she said. "I watched from my window. I knew enough to speak, and I did not." Maya looked at her for a moment. "Silence is not always peace," she said. "Sometimes it is permission." Mrs. Voss nodded, eyes wet, and that was the most honest exchange they had ever had. 3 months after the trial, Maya sat in a rehabilitation center trying to close her right hand around a plain white coffee cup. The nerves responded late then, all at once, the signal arriving with the imprecision of a system that had been damaged and was relearning its own geography. The cup tipped. Leon, sitting across the table, caught it before it fell. "The bureau doctor says firearms qualification may not be possible," Leon said. "For a long time. Maybe ever." The words settled between them. Maya flexed her fingers and felt almost nothing, and then too much. "A gun can stop one bad man," she said. She looked at Leon. "Evidence can stop an empire." She tried the cup again. Her hand trembled, a fine, constant tremor that she could feel but that the cup might or might not notice. The coffee rippled. The cup stayed upright. "That counts," Leon said. Maya set it down carefully. She looked at the cup for a moment, then out the window at the winter light coming through the glass, pale and clean and indifferent to everything below it. "Does it?" she said. Leon did not answer immediately. He watched her hand on the table beside the cup, the scars beginning to show at the edges where the tape ended and skin began. He thought about Claudette's photograph on the kitchen wall at 14 Sycamore Glen Court. the nurse in white with the proud shoulders, the eyes looking steadily at something outside the frame. He thought about the garden sign and the storage locker, and the key that had waited 6 years in a folded church program for someone with spine. Then he nodded. The cup stayed upright, the record stayed intact. And in the yard of a small brick house on Sycamore Glen Court, in the ground where Claudette once grew tomatoes in coffee cans, something was beginning quietly in the cold, in the dark beneath the surface to put down roots for spring. If this story stayed with you, if Maya's patience moved you, or Claudette's quiet courage, or the simple and costly act of one person standing up in a room full of people who had decided to sit down, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Every comment you leave helps us know which stories to tell next, and we read every single one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, because stories like this remind all of us that truth told patiently and completely can still reach daylight. And the people who carry it even when it costs them everything are the reason justice stays possible. We will see you in the next one.